Now, War of 1812 ends in late 1814. There really was no longer a need for a saltpeter cave. And the property owners were like, well, what are we going to do now? And they came up with an interesting idea, which was, why don't we start taking people into the caves for tours, seeing this wonder of Mother Nature? Now, Mammoth Cave was not the first show cave operation. Show caves, even in the 19th century, were not something uncommon to be found. But it still is one of the earliest examples of this type of tourism being engaged within the United States. And the owner of the property decided to keep slave labor involved in the operation, but now the slaves were going from being miners to now being tour guides. So Mammoth Cave got a really fascinating history, as you could probably always see by now, especially with human history. So many of the guides were African Americans that were enslaved, taking people into the cave. This was what they were told to do. A very interesting instruction, but much, in some ways, a lot better considering what normally happens when people were enslaved in the United States. On the other hand, you're going into the unknown, into areas uncharted by recent humans. You don't know what's ahead of you, and you're several hundred feet down in some cases. And it isn't like today when off to the right you can see there's all sorts of lights. The National Park Service got the whole thing lit up. In the early 19th century, if you're a tour guide at Mammoth Cave, you were operating with an oil lamp or a lantern with a candle inside. There's not much light, and if that goes out, oh no, it'll be pretty horrifying. Be time probably to soil your breeches. So, a very ambitious operation running Mammoth Cave as a show cave in the early 19th century, but indeed they did it. And these are some illustrations from the 19th century trying to give you a visual of the dark environment. Now, for the record, to have a vacation in early 19th century America, you had to be pretty wealthy. And a lot of these individuals that were wealthy, I'm sure several of them owned slaves, had maybe not necessarily on a plantation, but they had encountered the idea of slavery and used it to get their economic gain. So it must have been an interesting role reversal that once they go into the cave, the person they had to rely on ensuring that they'll get out of their vacation alive was an enslaved individual. Pretty interesting twist of power structure, if you ask me. And many of these guides went on to become basically pioneers in cave exploration, not just in Mammoth Cave, but in the Western Hemisphere. A lot of their names are celebrated today. And probably the most noteworthy one is a guy by the name of Stephen Bishop. Stephen Bishop came to Mammoth Cave at the age of 17. He, of course, was enslaved. He was brought there by the property owner at the time, and was told, go to work, give tours of the cave. Now, Bishop, though he may not know it when he first arrived in 1838, very quickly became the expert on Mammoth Cave. He had a knack for geology, or if you're in caves, speleology, or...
Yeah, geography.
Geology.
Yeah, well, actually, seismology.
Whatever, Case in point, he became very interested in how caves are formed. He got very interested into mapping out unknown portions of the cave, and many contribute a lot of the discoveries of Mammoth Cave to Stephen Bishop. He would be a guide there for over 20 years. The rest of his life was as a guide at Mammoth Cave, most of it being enslaved. Amongst the things that he would contribute to Mammoth Cave that are very commonplace if you go visit to it today. Taking a breather there. My brain fell apart. Amongst the things that he would contribute would be the discovery of the Mammoth Dome, Fat Man's Misery, which is this very narrow channel that was made by water. And they call it like a keyhole you have to go through, and you got to kind of like squeeze. You have to shuffle sideways in it. There's a reason it's called Fat Man's Misery. And he also ended up just being one of the first in recorded history to find the underground rivers in the lowest levels of the cave. And in fact, it was Bishop who was willing to take these building materials, drag them into the cave several miles down to where the rivers were, and construct boats just to ferry tourists in the cave. Again, this is all being done by no more than candlelight or by an oil lick. This guy's down here building boats. Like, uh, where have we, boy, have we fallen as as a society since the 19th to the 21st century. Well, okay, we got rid of slavery, but in other ends, it's like the ingenuity that Bishop and other tour guides had. There's a story where Bishop essentially had to prove his worth to a particular rich couple, and they dared him to show him something that he had no man had ever seen before, at least no man in recorded history. And they handed him a wad of cash. And well, he decided to bridge a 105-foot drop known as the bottomless pit. He managed to get him and his tour crew across to the other side, and as far as we're aware, no person since in ancient times had been on the other side of that pit. So he was able to prove everybody wrong if they made any doubts about him. And over time, his name became well publicized in newspapers, as well in early scientific articles relating to cave formations. In 1840, he formed one of the earliest maps of the cave, which is still an important piece in trying to figure out how big Mammoth Cave is. In 1856, Bishop was actually granted his freedom, and he ended up owning about 100 acres of the Mammoth Cave property. Sadly, he died just a few months after he got his freedom. And he's actually, for many years, he was buried in an unmarked grave at the mouth of the cave. But they decided to use a unused Civil War tombstone. It was supposed to be for a Union veteran, but never got used. In the 1870s, they actually reinterred Bishop in a proper cemetery, and they gave him a proper headstone. And that became a full graveyard for all of the guides in the 19th century of Mammoth Cave's age. So again, there were many guides implemented in the 19th century exploration of Mammoth Cave. Bishop is just merely the most well-noted. In fact, off to the right, there is his signature from 1850 found on the wall in the cave. All right.